that I was referring to the Hill. Now, I actually am happy to say I have a guest on the Hill, Capitol Hill, a member of the House of Representatives. Nebraska Congressman Jeff Fortenberry is a member of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations. Thank you for being here, Congressman. Always an honor and pleasure to have your insights.
Sheila, thank you for inviting me to come on again. How have you been doing?
Oh, well, busy, but I can't even say that. I can't say that to you, Congressman, because I imagine your schedule is probably far harder to keep up with than mine, but mine's pretty packed. But since I saw you at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, it was an interesting conversation we had. We got to hear that day, of course, from Archbishop Naumann, but also from House Speaker Paul Ryan, and it reminds us that, our faith and our nation's leadership, it goes hand in hand. Politics, we have to be involved in the political process, and we have no finer Catholic leader. I don't want to embarrass you, but I will tell listeners, we have no finer Catholic leader than you, Congressman. So I was eager to hear your thoughts, your impressions, because whatever the media say, that's one thing, but you're right there in the Congress, on the floor of the House, and I'm sure you're all talking about it a lot today. What did you think of the summit?
Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate your insights and thoughtfulness, and that's way too generous of an introduction for me. We're just all coming back into town for the first votes tonight, so many of us have watched from afar as to what has transpired in just the last day or so. All I can describe it as is the word stunning. President Trump's actions were bold, they were historic, and frankly, almost unimaginable given where we were just 6 months ago with North Korea and their inclination toward the most possible horrific type of aggression. And President Trump has done something perhaps radically new here in opening up the possibility of solving the world's most complex problems through a combination of what I call foreign policy realism and entrepreneurial diplomacy. And, the world is really screaming for a new type of interpersonal ecosystem, both in the home as well as in communities, but I also think between nations. And what President Trump did to Kim Jong-un was he was clear. He says, we're going to take you. We're going to take you either for ill or for good. And if you move one finger toward that nuclear weapons button, you're going to have a really bad day. But if you want to open up an authentic dialogue with the possibility of peace and friendship, we'll do that too. And so here we are. Now, it remains to be seen how this will develop, but I think this is a historic moment, particularly considering that we've been at this for 65 years as a stalemate. Remember from history there was something called 100 Years' War? Do we really want to have a 100 Years' War here? So I'm hopeful. I'm impressed. And, of course, you've got to be cautious and smart and prudent. But with this start, it opens up the possibility of an unimaginable vision that we couldn't have achieved just a few short months ago.
It does indeed. In fact, I was remarking right before you came on, Congressman, that just seeing the two men last night with all the drama and the lead up to that, and listening to different pundits on different television networks and so forth in their lead up comments, I just wanted to see it happen and make up my own mind. But when the two men walked out together and shook hands in front of their each of their flags of their nations, which by the way blended really amazingly together. But when we saw them shake hands and then all the cameras going off, that was really a stunning moment, wasn't it?
Well, again, I think the whole thing is just absolutely amazing, and the reality of this possibility of what I call authentic dialogue. The world, the construct right now that governs international affairs could be described as an ossified proceduralism or a multinational transaction, utilitarianism, if you will. Basically, even in our own diplomatic language, and I can't stand it. We say if it's in our national interest, we'll do that. And we've become so used to that kind of language, we don't even think about what it conveys. For instance, Sheila, if I said to you, well, maybe I'll come on your program if I find it to be in my personal interest. Nobody talks to one another like that. Why should nations talk to one another like that? So why not look for the opportunities to create some space for hospitality, the development of some type of relationship, the development of some type of understanding, which can then lead to trust, then can lead to agreements which are potentially lasting just like you do in your own personal affairs, versus what can you do for me, what can I do for you? That won't last. And that has been a construct. In trade agreements, we talk in these terms. In diplomatic parlance, we talk in these terms about interest. I think it is a wanting term, and we need to change that. And again, I think the president has disrupted ossified procedures, doing the same thing over and over again. That has led us to nowhere. And so I'm hopeful it's a start, but at the same time, you've got to do two things at once. You've got to lay down the vision and imagine what could possibly exist in the future, while at the same time dealing with certain realities. So this is going to be incremental at first, but it is a start.
On the point of being incremental, so the 4 points that they came away with in the release statement, the text of which is in the New York Times, among other places. I posted that online so people can read it for themselves. But at the conclusion of that summit, Washington and Pyongyang announced 4 broad joint goals, establishing new U.S.-North Korea relations for peace and prosperity, as you know, Congressman, telling the listeners, a lasting peace regime on the Korean peninsula, complete denuclearization of the peninsula, and the recovery and repatriation of POW MIA remains in North Korea. I have a couple questions there. Toward what you said, it'll be incremental. I mean, how much can you do in one historic meeting that just, as you said, breaks the inertia of all these decades, taking us into the possibility of another 100-year war? To break that in one summit, that was already gargantuan. And even to have that meeting and then to sit down and come away with 4 points they agreed on, that's huge. So maybe then there are going to be follow-up meetings with I know what John Kelly, Ambassador Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and others. That's going to go on. There will be further joint sessions in meetings to continue this and flesh it out. But your thoughts on these 4 points when they say a lasting peace regime on the Korean peninsula. That's very broad, of course. Would you say the specifics come later and get hammered out by those subsequent meetings?
Well, of course. Again, and I think this is trying to balance realpolitik with a vision of possibility. Again, entrepreneurial diplomacy combined with foreign policy realism. You take a first step, and outside of my office here, there hangs 3 flags, American flag, the Nebraska state flag, and the POW MIA flag, a black flag. For there to be some type of closure to a 65-year stalemate where approximately 50,000 Americans lost their lives, I think starts with a very sincere and real movement towards solving some of the MIA cases, missing in action cases, and returning remains where they can be found. I think that's genuine. That's smart. Again, it's an incremental step, and at the same time, the other components of the 4-point plan are pointing to the bigger realities of what could possibly exist, such as a new type of security dialogue that should take place, and Japan. Why not think big and boldly here rather than have 30,000 American troops sitting at the South Korean border, South Korea overly dependent upon our military and our own risk-taking with our own troops' lives potentially, China kind of playing a double game with us. They like us tied up with the North Koreans, and yet they're probably, you remember a couple months ago, Kim Jong-un rode the militarized train to go see President Xi in China. You remember that? Well, he got called to the principal's office because perhaps China is saying you've gone too far in terms of disrupting the stability of the region. So all of these things converge based upon President Trump's steely, clear resolve to create an opening here whereby you might have the possibility of enhancing the interpersonal dynamics between cultures, starting with healing war wounds, and then moving toward these broader security difficult negotiations that would have to take place that, again, aren't going to be instantaneous, but probably have to come in steps.
And in those follow-up subsequent meetings, to get back to what Washington had insisted upon before this, in the lead-up to the summit, that the language be complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. Well, at least yesterday they got the 4 points on paper in the joint document, and it did commit to complete denuclearization. So there's the complete of the other initials V and I being verifiable and irreversible. That's something that this is to my mind, Congressman. You can clarify this, but to my mind, it's that those will either be hammered out in the subsequent meetings, that they're both verifiable and irreversible, and provably so, of course, verifiable, or that, as you said, the Donald Trump's steely reserve to have any breach of this have follow-up consequences by the United States would be enough of would thwart any ideas they may have in North Korea to not keep this accord and make it, if they misstepped, that would lead to actions by our part. So those the war games that they play at sea and so forth that we're going to hold off on could immediately be reinstated.
Of course. I think, some people calling that a concession. I don't see it as a concession. I see it as practical and tactical. It's just tactical. It's a practical thing to do, to say, hey, we have told you we're not interested in regime change. We have said that to Kim Jong-un in just those words. And so to back that up with a measure that says we're not going to exercise that option right now is our way of saying, no, we're going to be tactical in developing a potential relationship with you. You're returning American citizens. It's a gesture. Thank you. You're returning those remains who we don't even know perhaps exist. Thank you. Creating the conditions for denuclearization. Let's start those talks with high-level diplomatic exchanges now. Irreversibility as well as verification, thorny. What that means is they would have to let people into their country, into the darkest corners, into the deepest holes, and see. Now, that's thornier. That's harder. Now, we do have a multilateral institution called the International Atomic Energy Agency who might be invested with that power, some other multilateral institution, because you think about, next month, American inspectors of some kind roaming all over North Korea, not real practical. So this denuclearization commitment is an important one. It's just the framework. It's the structure. The harder detailed working out to do is around, yes, verification as well as ensuring that it's not reversible.
It's a new day, and we'll see where this goes down the road. It has to be a wait and see thing, and of course everyone's going to be following this, riveted on the subsequent follow-up talks and so forth. But Congressman, you've long been a part of this, and this is not getting off the topic; it's staying on it. You've long been a champion of international religious liberty, conscience rights, conscience protection, religious freedom protection here domestically and abroad, certainly, because that, as Dr. Tom Farr has written and spoken on, international religious liberty is an element of our national security. It's important for our national security, but you also know, as a great human rights activist, it's important to protect religious liberty and conscience rights for people just to be a humanitarian. So Dr. Tom Farr was on the program yesterday talking with me about the Religious Freedom Institute, which he heads, president of that, that they had sent President Trump a letter ahead of this meeting, and they urged him to incorporate human rights in general and religious freedom in particular into America's summit strategy. There was a lot that went on. We may not know what all was said, but that's something that can be worked out through subsequent meetings, right? Because they want to send, for one thing, the United States Ambassador for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brown, back in, along with other international reporters on religious freedom, into North Korea at some point, for them to show goodwill that they're doing something to clean up, how they treat people. It's been called, by Dr. Tom Farr said, there's nowhere on earth more dangerous for dissenters of conscience, especially those who believe in God, than North Korea. So one would think, Congressman, this being a new day of relations, that there would be action on that front as well.
I know Tom Farr well. I really am greatly appreciative of his work. He's a contemplative and an academic and a person who actually seeks to change things in politics and public policy, and that's a great combination. And yes, of course, Tom needs to press that case, as we all do. North Korea is one of the grossest human rights violators in the world, and so this is the delicate dance that we have to engage in. For us to basically prescribe what kind of behavior now they're going to have because they've become enlightened after a 5-hour meeting is not practical. For us to begin some again, are building trust. Maybe there's some type of commercial exchange. Maybe there's diplomatic exchange. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's some interreligious or missionary type exchange that could be a part of the broader cultural exchange. And you take that step by step. I would suggest that anything that Kim Jong-un sees that would be threatening to his cult-like status might undo the possibility of any of this. So it's a delicate issue. Mm-hmm. It's one, of course, we have to raise out of respect for human dignity and human rights and the principles of civilization itself. It's one that we cannot ignore. But right now what we're trying to do is take a step back from the possibility of nuclear exchange and the deaths of millions of people. So I don't want to say first things first, it has to come in proper order. It has to sit alongside of many types of positive developments that we have to seek and seek steadily. To expect this to change overnight, though, is not realistic.
Oh, no. One thing's not even in the next follow-up meeting or the one after that. But, just with new relations, this was not just reportedly, this de facto was the furthest Kim has ever been out of his country by coming down to Singapore for this meeting. We all saw the photos or the video of him taking the tour the night before of this casino and, looking around with great interest in it all. And so one has to wonder about his engagement now with the West, the world's superpower. The president, now having sat down with him, had a very good, presumably good meeting. It does seem hopeful without being all wide-eyed and unrealistic. I like your statement, Congressman Fortenberry, that it does lay the foundation for a denuclearized Korean Peninsula, a dramatically new and constructive era for U.S.-North Korea relationships. And this sounds so much like you. This is what you're always after, a peaceful and prosperous future for the North and South Korean people because they have suffered so much. So that's both clear-eyed and very promising and hopeful, while at the same time being cautiously optimistic. I hope that can be the atmosphere with your colleagues.
And that's the difficulty here because, again, 6 months ago, you remember it was Little Rocket Man versus Dothard, I think they called him.
I know.
That's the right word. The North Koreans called President Trump that. And so here you are with, again, what I'm trying to do, and I hope you don't mind me doing it publicly with you, is point to not only the stunning development that has happened with North Korea, but what is embedded here is the possibility of a new architecture for 21st century international relationships, which is based upon leaning into the most complex problems, not simply accepting proceduralism that's been an established norm for 75 years but is not working. Okay, so they do something bad and we're going to go buzz them with B-52s off their coast and say don't do this. How long are we going to continue doing that? And when the world races ahead and the technology gap is closed in 10, 20, 30 years, and everybody on the planet, every strong man, every bad guy can kill anyone else with the flick of a switch, then what? You have to have a new architecture for diplomatic and international relations that's based upon this idea of an interpersonal ecosystem where one-on-one relationships between leaders matter and where it upon first authentic friendships and not just transactional exchange, which can then be manipulated for either good or harm and ultimately isn't lasting. That's the problem with just a materialistic view of diplomacy. When you go to the heart of the matter and you try to speak to individuals, as hard as the circumstances is, not overlooking the fact that they've committed gross human rights violations. In fact, this weekend I was back in Nebraska, and I had two of my younger daughters had their dance recital. There were 61 dances, Sheila, in this recital. I made it through 56. But I was a lot of times as well cutting grass through the weekend thinking, yeah, heroic, I know. But you know what was on my mind a lot of times as this build up to this North Korea American summit? It was the young man, Otto Warmbier, who you may remember was a student over there, did something innocuous, and then basically was put to death by the Koreans, by the North Koreans. And I'm thinking about him and his family and how heartbroken and the suffering, how deep their suffering still must be. And yet I'm hopeful that maybe he, as really a casualty of this 65-year-old war, has become a catalyst for actually trying to lean into one of the worst regimes in history and make changes that will prevent this kind of thing in the future. So that was what was going through my mind and heart. And again, it goes back to this idea of is it possible that we could see an emerging 21st century architecture for diplomatic relationships that moves away from things like national interest to more to the better use of the word authentic friendship and dialogue.
I love that. I love how you put that, Congressman. Authentic friendship and not just transactional exchange. That sounds so like you, but it also sounds so like the Holy Father and what the church is all about. What Cardinal Francis George talked about, the philosophy of friendship, the theology of friendship and relationship. This is important, and that you say a new architecture for international relationships. That's very, very hopeful and optimistic, and having you in government really, it gives us a lot of relief and hopefulness. We want to help you as well. So, Congressman, next time we talk, you can give us some marching orders. Thank you.